Hello, and welcome to this Launchpad episode. Today we have Ranga, who is the founder of a protocol called Solomon Labs. Solomon Labs is a new stablecoin protocol that is built on Solana. So that's a first for Rocket Fuel, that we have someone on Solana, building on Solana. In the episode we talk about the crypto journey that Ranga took to launch Solomon Labs and the stablecoin USDV, and we talk about what differentiates their stablecoin and how you can use it and the ways that you can earn yield, and talk about the crypto market in general and the changes that have happened this year with crypto to make launching something like Solomon feasible, and then about the ICO that is taking place right now as we're recording, and how you can get part of that and how you can take ownership of Solomon the protocol through buying tokens on the ICO. So this was a really interesting chat, and it's kind of different from what we normally talk about at Rocket Fuel, but hopefully you'll find it interesting and enjoy the conversation.
10, 9, ignition sequence start, 6.
Hi, welcome to this special episode of Launchpad. Today, for the first time, we have someone who's not in the Rocket Pool community or the Ethereum space. I know I feel really dirty talking to Ranga here, but I think it's going to be a fun one. You are an Ethereum at heart somewhere deep down in there after all that Solana stuff's been pushed on top of it. But that's okay. We're going to talk about that later. So, Ranga, who are you?
Hey, my name is Ranga. I'm the founder of Solomon Labs. We're building a more composable dollar that earns anywhere it sits. I don't know if you want me to get into my background, but I can do that. But we can keep things rolling.
Yeah, but before we talk about all that stuff, I actually know you in real life, right? That's our story.
It was serendipitous. It's so weird. I think we met a year and a half ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I ran into you and you were wearing a Rocket Pool shirt. And I thought there's no way this guy actually knows what he's wearing. And so I came up to you and I said, hey, cool project. Do you know what how are you associated with this project? You're like, actually, I am one of the main community, I forget what title you use. And I was like, no, wait, this is my first time meeting someone in the wild that's this involved in the community or the crypto community. And we kind of hit it off from there. And actually, you're one of the reasons I met Steven, and he ended up joining Solomon Labs.
Not one of the reasons I recommended him. So
yes,
yeah,
you did.
That's right.
You did.
So yeah, we'll talk about that
we
later
live
too.
10 minutes from each other, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, even though that's our Rocket Pool connection right there, so it kind of fits in with this channel. So that's all good. We've ticked that box now. We mentioned Rocket Pool, so that's all good. So you founded Solomon Labs, that's really cool. We're going to be talking about that later, but who are you? What's your crypto story? Where did it begin?
Yeah. So my background's in electrical and biomedical engineering. I actually started my career off as a co-op student at RIM. The Canadians that might be watching, they know that later was called BlackBerry, or they were the manufacturers of BlackBerry. I was a software developer there. This was back when they were going through that big transition through their Java-based platform into what was called BBX. But that was really exciting times, and missed that part of the Canadian history. Unfortunately, it doesn't really exist in that manner anymore. So around that time, after I graduated, I started dabbling in crypto as just a user or someone
What year was
playing
that?
around with. This was around, so I was still in college, somewhere around 2013. And so just the first sort of BTC transactions, I think I bought it off Coinbase, played around with it on the internet. We can all understand why we would use crypto back then. But that's where the interest sort of started. And then it wasn't until about 2015 is when I read the Ethereum white paper, was sold on the idea of smart contracts, this idea that you could programmatically ensure things or enforce things on chain, right? So that sort of opened up the world for me. And I started thinking about, okay, what are the real world applications for it? It's funny me saying the world, real world applications with RWAs, but really in some ways I was early for that time. So one of the first project that I founded was called Zywatt, which was a renewable energy project, or brought renewable energy assets on chain. and there's a way you could distribute the yield generated from there. And then we had some tie-ins to how credits could then end up paying your utility bill. Actually, at that time, we might have been one of the first ones to get some sort of traditional VCs backing us for that project.
What year was that in?
This was in 2017.
Wow, that's so early, yeah.
Yeah, 2017. And then, as you know, what happened with that phase or cycle, things didn't go too well in 2018 and 19. We ended up in a pretty deep bear. And that project ended up turning into some pilot projects in California and Brazil. I still get people reaching out saying, hey, we love the model. We want to deploy it here. How can we do that? And usually I'm talking to them, helping them through that. And then fast forward to DeFi summer, there was like a year, I would say, I kind of took a break in around 2019, 2020. And then with DeFi summer, I had someone reach out and ask for some help with an NFT project that they were doing with the DAO. And I was sort of fascinated with the idea of permanence on chain. How can we effectively or reduce the size of these assets that are being put on chain and find some unique ways where we could manage that and some, gamify some of these NFT projects or the project that they were doing. That eventually led to me building my second project. And at this time, that was under an Anon identity. And we developed a NFT lending protocol that did, about 30 to 40 in loan volume for some of the biggest collections in the space. So this was around 23 now, 2023. And this is when I started to pay attention to this really sort of deep dive into the stablecoin space, especially with the way things were moving from a regulatory point of view. I mean, obviously, what regime we were under, but I sort of saw that, okay, there's this sort of point we're coming to where we need acceptance of this. Like, no one can reject where we're headed, and the regulatory environment where we live, it's going to ease up, and there's a good sense, there's a real chance that we're going to get real adoption. So at that time, I had been really just trying to figure out how can we build a dollar that can earn yield natively. And that was around the same time Athena had launched. And they were really the first ones to bring permissionless yield on chain or sort of real yield, especially after the Luna blow up. So with that, I eventually led to Solomon, and we could talk about Solomon in a bit, but and sort of where it differs. But that's sort of the crypto journey. And then, in between all of that, I did have I was a senior staff engineer at ODVA, which is they manage the development of SIP and Ethernet IP, which is the Common Industrial Protocol, basically the protocol that all PLCs, robots, machinery talk on the industrial floor. So my mindset in terms of how I think about things was very deeply sort of entrenched in thinking about standards and layers and how they operate in a rules-based sort of world. So that's sort of engineering mindset and especially a standards and protocol type level thinking background.
So, yeah, nice. That's really cool stuff. So let's go back and unpack your story a little bit. You got into Bitcoin 2013. You sent money back and forward. There's not much you can do. So that's all good. Yeah, you hold. Then Ethereum, you read the white paper that I guess that piqued your interests. Was the first project that you built, was that then built on Ethereum? Like how was that?
Yeah, that was built on Ethereum. You could think of it a type of Kickstarter style fundraising platform built on Ethereum. We would issue tokens for every renewable energy project that essentially represent ownership or share of that project. So yeah, that was totally fully on Ethereum. And yeah.
So is that you think that developing for Ethereum was the way that you really increased your passion and your desire for working in crypto?
Yeah, no, Ethereum, I mean, it was wild times. It was 2017. It was yeah. I think there were so many builders at that time that were still they really believed in the space. Like they really believed in what they were building. There's a sort of innocence to it in some ways. I know there was a lot of scamming happening with ICOs, but there was a lot of real builders who were genuinely excited about the technology, genuinely excited about the future of Ethereum, the power that blockchain and crypto held in terms of I would say democratizing access to things or shared ownership. Those concepts are really the early concepts of governance on chain. I think people really intrigued by that. They really believed these things could fundamentally change the way we interact or deal with companies or even think about ownership. Though, like I was sold. Like I was, I'm a full believer in that. See, after everything that sort of the scams, sort of it was a drag, right? Everything that happened post 2017. But no, I miss, in some ways, I miss the builders that were there then. But I'm excited because I think we finally matured as a market, and it looks like we're back. Like we're
Yeah.
back to thinking about these things from a place where we can build.
That's really exciting. So let me actually talk to you a little bit more about that, right? Like, so the early days of crypto, it was like full of idealism and hope, and the possibilities were just like unreal, right? Like, people were thinking of putting everything on chain, and some of it was misguided and some of it was maybe naive, but it was full of hope and excitement. So you were a staff engineer at BlackBerry. So you were an engineer at BlackBerry. When you started to get into crypto, like how quickly did like crypto take over your brain compared to like your TradFi, like your...
Yeah, so after BlackBerry, that's when I joined ODBA, which was building developing common industrial protocol. So there was already a sense of thinking about things from a protocol layer level. So when I was dealing with Ethereum, I had that mindset. And so it was a lot of that application into how Ethereum worked and operated. But yeah, no, it was, I think you sort of almost have these manic episodes where you think you can change the world. And it was at that level during those early days thinking about what was possible with Ethereum. Like it was, people who are seeing this now, and a lot of Solana folk, but the older days where it was just Ethereum, that's really, it was a favor. Like it was people were extremely excited, and it really did sort of, I was just pacing around in my house, just thinking about all of the ways we could change the world with smart contracts. So it completely sort of took over.
So did you quit your job and start working crypto full time?
So in 2017, 2018, I was still working full time. I needed a paycheck. And then I started to ease off on the transition there, and took on less responsibilities. But I was still maintaining my real job, my job as a staff engineer for developing SIP and Ethernet IP. It wasn't until 2022 where I've, full time into crypto, in the sense that, hey, I left behind any sort of safety net and was a full in, or 2021, 2022.
So how did it impact your relationship, like your relationships in your personal life? Like what did your family and friends think about you becoming such a big like crypto head, basically?
It's funny, my dad has an IT background, or he's a professor that teaches, IT courses. He really wanted to understand what I was doing. He really wanted to, and he really did. Like we sat down, we talked about how Bitcoin works, what's the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, how smart contracts operate. And he actually ended up ended up mining Monero. Nice. He set up a mining rig for Monero, and he was mining Monero in 2008, I think. I can't remember the date. But, my parents, obviously, they didn't fully understand, but my dad tried to understand, and he got pretty far. I think he was still sort of skeptical about the real world applications for it. And then, my brothers are both engineers. I kind of joke about it because I'm the youngest of the three, and it goes, my oldest brother sort of, he's in the automation field. He owns a company that does industrial control, so he's building these automation lines for just about anything you could think of. And so he's kind of I would say, the analog world, where direct, at the hardware level almost, where you're interacting with the real world. And then my other brother, the one in the middle, at this time he was deeply within the tech world. He was at Apple, Facebook, Uber. And then, so he was sort of Web 2, and then I was Web 3. So I joke that it's like Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. The Web 2 guys didn't really understand the Web 3 guys. They knew something was going on, but yeah, no, it was exciting. I mean, there wasn't a lot of skepticism. I mean, there was a layer of skepticism, but I think they were excited that we're doing something, and just the entrepreneurial spirit of it as well. Just seeing building something. That's something that they were excited for me.
How did 2018 and 2019 feel, like, with your company, like, not working out, like, and just crypto being down so bad? Like, what was that process like?
Yeah, it was hard. You work really hard to build something. And at that time, you were, just right before the crash in 2018, we had gotten really far. and we had a pipeline of potential, of PPAs, which was power purchase agreements, in terms of the amount of projects that we're going to onboard for Zywatt. We had, I think, around 50 to 60 million worth of PPAs or agreements. And so when we got into the bear, like, almost all that excitement, all that community that was forming around Zywatt started to drain out. There was very few people left behind, and with that, it was pretty. I mean, it was tough, and to just sort of carry through and trying to keep the project alive while also thinking about funding, right? There's only so much runway you have. I was backing the project. This is why I needed to work my full-time job at the same time, which was to keep the project alive. So it was very difficult. I mean, it was, I think it was around 2019 where I said, hey, I can't maintain this company. We don't have the funding for it. And I turned it into an advisory status where other projects that were launching, like I mentioned, in California and Brazil, with the same concepts, with their own local funding, I was able to support, but not as a centralized, right? Those projects weren't launching on my platform. Yeah.
I understand. And then what actually got you back into crypto then? Like, how did you hear about like some of the excitement and resurgence that was in 2020, like DeFi Summer and stuff? Like, how did you hear about that? And like, what was it that pulled you back in?
So it wasn't that I completely left. I was still
Hmm.
paying attention to the space. I still had friends in the space, so I was still keeping up with the news. It was more that I wasn't actively building in that state. In 2021, a friend had reached out asking for help, and they knew my background, and that's where it sort of pulled me back in. Said, okay, we're back to building. And yeah. So it was really just someone who knew my background asked for help, and as I started to help, they realized, okay, there's something here again that I need to take part in. And at that time, it was the NFT craze, right? Right around DeFi Summer. Again, I was sold on the idea of permanence on chain. Like, that really intrigued me. And, for as long as Ethereum would be alive, there's this state and data that's preserved, right? And anyone can access it, even on BTC, right? We had ordinals and things like that come about. But that's what really, like, I really was just fascinated with that idea, and that's what pulled me back in. And that's where the journey started again.
So did you get into NFT like art yourself, or was it more about like the tech side of it?
It was mostly the tech side. There was, I liked, for that project, I was thinking about how to gamify the NFT project in a way that would incentivize the writing on chain. And there was, at that time, especially, the gas costs were astronomical. And so it was about the sort of gamification of how can we get people to pay the necessary gas in order to actually write on chain. And so, to me, I was mostly interested in that aspect. The art was cool. I mean, I don't know if I had the right taste in picking the right NFTs. I participated. I bought some NFTs. I thought some of the art was very cool. I actually, in 2017, I still remember I gave a lecture or presentation on the difference between ERC20s and 721s. So I was talking about NFTs in 2017, and then it was crazy to me. Back then it was CryptoKitties, and then after that was CryptoPunks. And so it was sort of surreal to see NFTs pop back up in that way and catch that narrative. I didn't see that coming. I thought NFTs were cool, but I did not see the NFT frenzy that occurred.
So what happened with that protocol then, like the one that you guys made in 2021? Is it still going? Did it kind of go bust? Like, what's the situation?
The NFT lending protocol, I mean, the vertical pretty much collapsed, right? NFTs didn't. I think the thesis there was that it would follow the same pattern as the rest of DeFi, right? As NFTs became popular, we would need infrastructure tied to DeFi to support NFTs. And I think the core concept is still there, but it seems like NFTs never really, they're still, they ended up being not what's the right word here? Like, they're not, they really are unique of their own in the sense that they don't follow the same pattern as DeFi. They're not fungible tokens that people want to sort of transact in the same manner as what we originally thought would happen with NFTs. They really are, in some ways, about flexing in some ways on chain, right? Like, hey, I've got a CryptoPunk, or really like as closer to fine art, I would say. There just isn't enough demand for the DeFi infrastructure that we were building in order to sustain the project. So the project is pretty much still going. It's still live, but it's I've stepped back from it, and I'm no longer part of it.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. So then I guess the 2022 bear market kind of like really killed a lot of like NFTs, obviously, but also a lot of other projects kind of got hit really hard, right? Like crypto prices went down so much, with the implosion of 3 Arrows Capital and like BlockFi and Celsius, and then later, of course, FTX. It was just like a really brutal year. How did you how was that year for you?
It actually went. I avoided all of it, so it was great for me, not great for the industry. We got hit back to back, right? And I think the final nail in the coffin at that time was the Luna crash, right?
No, that was the beginning of it. Oh,
that was beginning. Sorry, the
FTX
3 Arrows
crash was
Capital, FTX. Sorry, FTX was the final nail. Sorry, you're right. Luna was the start, and then FTX was the. I mean, the Luna crash. It was so obvious that it was coming. I remember few weeks prior to the depegging event, I had messaged everyone around me. I said, hey, if you're in Luna, you should get out. And, a lot of people still sort of wanted to hold on to the belief of, steady last deploying capital. But anyone who looked into any level of detail there, just poked around just for a little bit, would have understand this is not sustainable. This cannot work.
I feel like it was mostly like the Ethereum community that were kind of saying this stuff. And then everyone was like, oh, you're just jealous that this is taking off and like doing so well and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, no, like, we've seen these Ponzi's blow up before, like be careful. And I remember like 2021, even like, a year before it collapsed, like there were people who were saying like, this is a bad design. Like this is going to crash eventually. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I had someone debating me up to that point, like, 2 weeks prior to that depegging. I was convincing, he was an engineer that worked for us, and he had all of his life savings in Luna. And I was telling him, hey, letting you know, it is gonna crash. It's gonna depeg, and you're gonna lose your money. Yeah. And he kept trying to argue that, no, like it's sustainable in this manner, blah, blah, blah. I just said, hey, look, you can listen to me. You don't have to, but it's up to you. And luckily he got out, and he still sends me messages to this day thanking me. So You're right. When in crypto, it's very hard to properly separate out sort of FUD versus real criticism or criticism that's valid, right? And I think people thinking on the Luna side is like, hey, these people are just trying to FUD, they're jealous, they're this or that, envious. And it is, for the average user, it's extremely difficult to differentiate between that. But I think most people, especially on the Ethereum side, or those that have been around and understood how protocols work, and especially been around for a lot of the stable coins that were experimental in the earlier space, which eventually collapsed and burned down to zero. I mean, they all understood what was coming.
Yeah. Exactly. 2020, there was a whole lot of like yield farming stuff and protocols collapsing like overnight, like scary stuff, right? And then 2 years later, obviously, it was much bigger in scale. Up to $40 billion was lost with Terra Luna, but it was a dark time. Like you're right. Let's talk about Solomon Labs, like Solomon, the project. So you and I met, like we said earlier, about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. When we met, you were like, hey, you're in crypto. Like I was talking about Rocket Pool, and you had just about, I think, had the very early ideas, or I think you were kind of developing the ideas of Solomon Labs. I don't think you even had a name at the time, but I remember you talking to me about like stable coins and like, all this kind of like delta neutral stuff and blah, blah, blah. Where did the idea come from? Like, where did you get the idea for Solomon Labs from, and Solomon as a protocol, and how did that grow?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, it was really, I had already been thinking about where the space was headed, as if crypto was going to be a real thing, right? Had real value to the world and really transform how we do finances, essentially. The cornerstone of that was going to be stables. And so I had been thinking about stables in that sense for some time. And I think it was Athena when they launched and brought on permissionless yield on chain. That's when it really started to, the gears were really turning in my head, saying, okay, this is really cool. What they've done is really important, but they weren't the first. UXD on Solana did the exact same thing, except everything was on chain. And unfortunately, this is where we talk about sort of being practical versus trying to be a purist. Um, they, at that time, the perps market on chain weren't mature enough to have enough funding rates to provide enough yield for someone to actually want to go and stake their stablecoin with UXD and earn that yield. Athena sort of lifted the curtain, I guess, or pulled the curtain back and said, okay, look, like, what do people actually care about? They want some type of sustainable yield that's higher than what is offered right now anywhere. And they don't want it to be, especially post Luna, right? They wanted something that's actually sustainable and is backed by, or has been done for a very long time. You know, hedge funds have been running these strategies for decades, right? This is a proven model, right? And so they brought yield on chain, and at that time, I was really struggling to understand why they went with the two token model. Why did they have a spend token in USDE and a staked version in SUSDE? And I think they did it for a number of reasons. But in terms of value add, there's actually no need for the stablecoin in their system. You could just have the staked version and everything would work the same. And it's, if you really think about it, what function is the stablecoin actually serving on chain? It's not being used for anything. It's not a quote pair anywhere. It serves no real function. But it does serve a function for Athena because it gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of the staked version versus the unstaked. So you have a huge portion that they can incentivize you hold where you don't pay out the yield and instead you can pay through ENA emissions, right? And so they get a lot more flexibility about where that yield accrues and how they direct it. And essentially, in some ways, it's a cut that they take as well. So that was really what where I started thinking about, okay, we need sort of a better model. Like, I think there's something here with trying to create a stable coin that can have native yield accrued to it directly. But the big problem with a lot of these accrual tokens or these staked versions is that they drift in value. They rebase or they drift in value, makes them very difficult to be composable across DeFi, especially in indexes. And that's the early stages were really thinking of, how do I get a token that accrues value, stays composable? And the first versions, I talked about this in my Twitter post, was again, going back to standards and protocols, as well, maybe I could create at the base layer a way to account for this accrual, and on certain touches, the state updates and their account balances update with the yield that's been generated. It's very difficult to get people to adopt a whole new chain. I think maybe there's a world where some of the bigger players that are coming out could maybe look at this model and think about how they could implement it. But yeah, that led me into trying to figure out where's the right place to build something for stables, or okay, if I can't build my own chain, what's the next best thing? And this is the answer that you're not going to like. When it comes to payments, there's a lot of friction in terms of how Ethereum operates that makes it difficult to think about payment rails being on Ethereum itself, technically speaking, and also just the expense of it. So Solana was the right choice because it already had sort of the ingredients necessary to support a real payment rail. And payment rails are where stables are needed. So this was the decision to go to Solana, and sort of where the birth of Solomon happened. We can get into sort of so what is Solomon and whatnot, but I didn't want to get ahead of myself here.
That's okay. No, that's interesting. So let's actually spend a few seconds unpacking the fact that you went to Solana, right? So you said that with Ethereum, the rails weren't there, and I guess the costs as well. Like, the idea was that it was higher, right? So when you say the rails weren't there, like, what do you mean by that?
So what I mean is just purely from, at that time especially, gas costs are too high for, imagine if we actually did have payments happening on Ethereum. It's just not sustainable. The throughput isn't there. The gas costs are too expensive. So just that simple fact alone makes it very difficult. Then you're starting to look at doing L2s, right? And in my opinion, at that point, okay, you're basically talking about another chain. Where do I see, again, this is an Ethereum, I'm talking to an Ethereum
No, go ahead.
audience.
Like, it's totally fine. Don't worry about that.
So
yeah, you're good.
So I think when you look at the evolution of especially a year and a half ago, when you look at the evolution of how layer ones evolve, right? You have sort of the development phase, and then you have the initial excitement, and then you have capital accumulation. So capital accumulations already occurred on Ethereum via DeFi, DeFi Summer and NFTs to an extent. And at that time, where things were headed was capital accumulation happening on Solana. And a lot of that was through memes. But there was something else happening there where they were looking forward and saying, okay, we have the infrastructure to support payments. And I think after the capital accumulation phase, I think we're going to get to a place where Solana can handle or has the infrastructure necessary, has the throughput necessary to actually be able to support fast payments. And that's the difference. So it was partially like where things are headed and where things are in terms of the evolution of these layers. Solana seemed to be the right fit.
Yeah, I understand. And like, of course, as an Ethereum, like I would say that, I can understand some of those criticisms, especially, from a year and a half or 2 years ago, where the situation was slightly different from what it is now. I think that, the roadmap for Ethereum, it means that like something like Solomon would absolutely thrive on Ethereum now, potentially, or like, in the next year or two, like definitely. And if not on layer 1, which I think it would, but then on layer 2 or something like that itself.
Yeah,
But that's totally fine. Like, I'm not
no,
trying to argue with you
I know
about
it's
anything.
hard. I still love Ethereum. It's not, I was an ETH maxi for a while. It's not, but I think there's something else there. I've been building in Ethereum for so long, and I think part of it is because Ethereum's been there for so long. There's a lot of the culture there is a problem with the culture on Ethereum in terms of builders building. Like there's people are very cagey. A lot of times where it makes sense to work together. I'm talking about being practical. I'm not saying, DMing random people and saying, let's work together, let's do a partnership or collaboration. I mean, where there's practical sense of like, hey, this really makes a lot of sense. Let's at least talk about it and figure out how we can work together. It's very difficult for people to in Ethereum, I feel like it's very difficult for people to do that. There's a sense of sort of caginess. There's a sense of builders, thinking there's a risk associated with supporting your projects. And obviously there's reason for that too, right? Especially with the baggage that Ethereum holds. So I can understand it, but it's been quite different building on Solana, to be honest. It feels like it's much more mission driven. There's a sort of broader purpose that people feel that they're aligned to. And it has been a lot easier. And this is from my own experience. People might have different experiences, but that's been the case for me.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I think to some extent that's fair. I've come across multiple projects where the person like started building on Ethereum because they were in Ethereum, they loved Ethereum, and they didn't get support, from the wider Ethereum community. I'm not going to name the projects, but if someone wants to ask me, I can name them. But I know of at least like 2-3 different projects where then those projects kind of branched out to Solana, and the amount of like, a warm embrace they got from the Solana community was significant, and I think there's lots of reasons for that. Like you said, there's a caginess of people not wanting to get involved with something new because there've been so many rug pulls. Also, I think there was like a culture from the Ethereum Foundation from the very top where, the Ethereum Foundation wanted to distance itself from the builder community in a sense. Like the links between one are strong. But I think in this last year, Ethereum's really taken that on board and is doing really, really great stuff now for trying to build those relationships between the Ethereum Foundation and the community as well. So I think that, Solomon Labs kind of came up in a time where Solana made sense. Like, sadly, it pains me to say, but if you were like, coming up now or maybe next year, it might have been a very different experience for you, but that's totally fine. Like you guys are going on Solana, like that's okay. So let's actually talk about Solomon Labs and Solomon the token a little bit. Like you've kind of explained there's a stablecoin, there's a spendable part, and then there's a stake part where you can earn yield. Where does the yield come from?
Yeah, the yield is derived from a basis trades, long spot, short in the perp market. And so you're delta neutral, you have no directional risk in the market. And, the longs are paying out a funding rate to the shorts. And so we're collecting that and bringing it on chain.
Okay.
So that's part of the yield. And then the rest of it, when those yields aren't so great, we're integrating T-bills.
Okay, excellent. So now where are you going long and short? Are you going on chain, off chain? Like what's happening?
So the flow is actually on chain. People deposit capital. That capital then ends up in Cefu, which is a custody provider, which is insured. And Cefu is then integrated with sexes. In our case, we're working on Binance or as a legal entity. So Cefu then mirrors those funds onto Binance, and the trades actually occur on Binance. That's where the strategies are executed. So it protects us in the cases where something like where, similar to what Bybit hack, right? So in that case, if we had been deployed on Bybit and we were working through Cefu, our funds would have been protected from loss.
Yeah. So I want to get a little bit technical for a minute, and sorry
Mm.
for the audience if they get bored by this. So on 1010, the crypto markets kind of imploded, and the alt market imploded really badly, right? So, there was leverage longs basically got wiped out completely. Like we saw huge crashes. It looks like some market maker probably blew up and had to dump their whole position. Now, Athena does a similar thing, and they are integrated on Binance also. And ENA, the token, got hit quite hard, and there was some off pegging kind of happening. Would that be something that USDV, your stablecoin, is susceptible to as well?
So we were actually live during October 10th when the Binance dislocations occurred. So we were fully deployed and we weren't impacted. There's a queue in terms of who gets. I think you're talking about ADLs, like auto
deleveraging. Yeah, that's right.
And so there's a queue in terms of priority of how sexes prioritize who gets deleveraged, and we're pretty far down in that queue. But in Binance's case specifically, there's coin margin and stable margin in terms of how you operate the perps, how you open up your perps position. And so for stable margin positions, sorry, I may be mixing this up. I think coin margin positions, they're exempt from ADLs to begin with, so they won't be ADL'd. So that's one way to protect yourself is, okay, just use coin margin instead of stable margin. And then there's ways you can come to agreements with venues in saying, okay, we're not operating with leverage. We're pretty far down on the queue in terms of where we would stand in ADL queue, and you can sign agreements that can potentially exempt you altogether from that occurring. And there's rumors that I haven't seen if it's been confirmed, but Athena had those specific exemptions. But I think a lot of their positions were coin margined anyway, so they wouldn't have been ADL to begin with.
Yeah, so when you said that you open a short and a long and you kind of pocket the yield, what assets are you actually longing and shorting? Like, how does that work?
So we only deal with the big three, which is BTC, ETH, and Sol. And most of our positions have been in BTC because they offer, there's open interest is there, and then there's enough liquidity, and then and the funding rates have been pretty good historically. Last year I think it was about 15% annualized, and so it's all in BTC, ETH, and Sol. And I think right now we're like 95 or 94% deployed. And BTC.
Excellent. And you've had this, beta running for a year now, right? Like you've had this position open. How has that been? Like, you've kind of alluded to the fact that you guys were good on 1010. You've said that, your yield has been about 15%. Like, do you think you've got a strategy down for having these positions open and closing them and chasing the yield?
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand that everything's policy driven. You write a framework, and it's not a human in the middle just winging it, right? It's policy driven in terms of when we deploy, when we rotate, when we back out, when we close out positions, and you follow that formula, right, based on your framework. And we've been running for about a year now. I would say a little bit longer in terms of experimenting, but with live users, we've been doing it for 8 months to a year, and we've had yield distributions on chain for that amount. So we've been able to survive through some of the biggest market shocks in crypto history. Well, I would say the biggest market shock in crypto history, especially with October 10th. So no, that's one of the reasons we feel confident that, hey, look, like we've built a back end that we can trust, and we're ready to roll it out for the big show.
Nice. Okay, so who's your team? Like, who's working on Solomon? Like, what expertise do you guys bring? Like, what are your credentials for us to know that you guys are all good?
So you already have a background on me. Engineering background. I forgot to mention I also built airport systems as a controls engineer. I've actually also done some work in NMRs, nuclear magnetic resonance. That's all sort of some of the history. But so I've been around for a while, especially in crypto. and have a lot of experience in building teams and products. Our CTO is Joshua Richardson. He built Bamboo Relay, which integrated 0x Relay back in the day, and he was a one-man show there. So he has a lot of experience building DEXs and SEXs from ground up. Really knows the ins and outs there, and he brings that experience over to our team as a co-founder and CTO. And then finally, we have Steven, your friend. I think he's within the Rocket Pool community. People know him well.
Mhm.
He comes from PayPal. He was one of the individuals leading the PYUSD deployment or project for PayPal. So that's the three of us. Those are the core three team members. And then we have a few others that are working as well. But
That's cool.
that's the core of it.
Yeah, and Steve, of course, is another one of my in real life friends who I met through the Rocket Pool community and I've met many times in person. Like the story, of course, is that, you were looking to hire and I was like, I know someone who you could hire. And then you got Steve. So that was pretty great. That I was
we
able
owe
to
you
meet
one
guys.
for that.
I
I'm
know.
really glad we connected, and
Yes.
I'm glad I asked you. I was like, all right, you probably know someone.
Yeah, I know a lot of people in crypto, so that's really cool. Tell me about what's going on right now. So you have launched an ICO for your token on metadao, and this is an ICO platform on Solana. Like, why did you guys go to metadao? What is happening with your ICO? And then we're going to actually talk about your token after that. So tell me about that experience.
Yeah. So, when we were building Solomon, there was, after we got into a point where we have a product and we think we have something here. The next phase is, okay, well, do we raise funds? How do we raise those funds? Because we need those funds for scaling. And the options were at that point, okay, we could do a pre-seed, KOL round and then roll that into a VC round, have it, a lot of these seed rounds go at a fairly decent valuation. But what you end up with is the classic low float, high FDV when you eventually launch the token. And we've seen how most of those projects are going. I think at 4 or 5 years ago, that would have been okay. And you could have a bunch of people FOMO in and eventually at the TG point. And then really it optimizes for optionality for the few VCs that get in, right? We needed to figure out, okay, how do we get, when we started thinking about it from that perspective, that's when metadao became sort of a clear option, or ICOs in general. What ICOs had right was the alignment that you could get from your backers, and your backers become your users, right? And stablecoins it is the most used product in crypto, right? And so if we could get that alignment and distribution, that would be the ideal path forward. Up to this point, I would say up to this year, ICOs have had a bad rep. It's scam vibes are very high for ICOs, and people have lost faith and trust in ICOs. But I think the spirit of ICOs were right. And, a few months ago, I had started really paying attention to metadao and the framework that they were creating around ownership coins. So where they're unique is that essentially they fix a lot of the problems that had existed with ICOs by creating the proper parameters and guardrails for how ICOs are conducted, and then specifically how governance is orchestrated. If you're familiar with the term fetarchy, being, people label it as fetarchy. Beyond that, I think where they really have, I personally like the idea of ownership coins or using the term ownership coins. I think it's much more grounded and understandable. So anyway, so that was sort of the story of how I came, and in Solana fashion, I messaged a couple of people, got in touch with Profit, who's the founder. We talked within a few minutes after just texting each other and said, hey, let's get on a call, pitch each other. And we realized, okay, yeah, this is a good fit. Let's move forward. And so that's sort of how we ended up on metadao and running this ICO.
Yeah. So what's really interesting about this ICO is that, first of all, the team tokens are locked for a minimum of 18 months. And then after that, you're giving just less than 50% is available through the ICO. A chunk of it, about 10%, I think, if that's right, is going to providing liquidity on chain.
20.
And then,
yeah.
Sorry.
20%. Yeah.
20%. Okay. Yeah. And then the rest of it is going to be locked away for the team. And the way that it gets unlocked for the team is if the token hits certain price levels, right? Like, why did you choose this mechanism for team token unlocks, and how do you think it'll work out for you guys?
I think this really shows alignment. Typically, that was one of the things that ICOs had wrong, right? You just hand over a bunch of cash, a bunch of capital to people, and there's no real alignment on chain in terms of um, making sure that the backers of the project have some sort of say in terms of keeping the builders in check, right? And this, I think, is a compromise here. I think it's probably skewed towards the token holders versus the builders, the people running the project. But I was willing to take that trade-off because I think it shows that we're serious about building or aligning for the success of this project versus just trying to cash in.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it's from a builder's perspective, it is a bit scary that we have zero influence over governance to start with, right? But I call it optimistic governance, where the idea is that, hey, the backers are trusting the builders to build, but they have the levers necessary in order to bring them in check if they get out of line, or if they start to feel that the builders are acting in bad faith.
So the team tokens then are, 50% of the protocol tokens, and they, like I said, are locked for 18 months. At the ICO, for example, if you guys, we'll talk about this in a minute about what your targets for raising are, but hypothetically, if you raise at like $1 million, which is just a rough number.
Yeah.
So, when you hit a 2x, so when the market cap goes to 2 million, then you will get one tranche of those tokens. And then when it goes to 4x, then you'll get another tranche, 8x, another tranche, and then 16 and 32x for your final tranches. So it really does show that, the token, you guys have to work on the project to get access to your tokens. Without hitting those targets, those tokens will never be unlocked to you, right?
Yeah, and it's not just quick spikes in price. We have to maintain a 3-month TWAP in order to get the unlock. So it's an 18-month unlock and then a 3-month, and then to get the unlock, you have to have a 3-month TWAP of the price sustained at that level in order to, unlock whatever tranche the price is at.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So that's the other part, is to make clear as well, is that you will get 0 tokens for 18 months, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So let's talk about the actual token itself. So Solomon, you've kind of called it like an ownership token, a kind of, how does the token have value? Like, where does the value come from for the token?
So I think it's best explained by metadao themselves in terms of how they describe the ownership aspect. So it's not equity in that sense, but it's these tokens that have direct rights towards the DAO treasury that is created, right? So they can directly influence decisions. For example, if the community wanted to decide to do buybacks, they could do that. If they wanted to liquidate the treasury, they could do that. So it was, in terms of alignment, like this was sort of the best general way to get alignment between the builders and the backers. So yeah, the ownership coins here represent direct and actionable governance, and that has economic impact, not just symbolic impact.
Yeah, and that's actually really interesting. For example, if hopefully USDV has a TVL of, say, $1 billion, and you guys are earning yield on that, and some of that is going to the stakers, some of that's going to the protocol. Say in a year's time, you've got $5 million or $10 million in the treasury, saved up as stables or as yield that you've been earning. Then the community, the token holders, could then vote on what to do with that money, right? So they could use it to buy the token, a solo, and buy and burn it, for example, or they could just do an airdrop to all the token holders. Like, they could literally vote on whatever they want to do with those tokens. Is that right?
Yeah. So all revenue generated is directed back to the treasury, and then the token holders get to decide what to do with that treasury.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they could propose any number of those things, but obviously during the early stages, it's about growing, using that capital to grow the company and to scale the company. But ultimately, yeah, that's the whole point, is they have direct control over that via governance.
So that's actually a really novel approach, right? Because I think what's happened in the past is that, we've had a lot of these like, so-called governance tokens that don't really have that much power. I'm thinking of something like the Uniswap token, for example, Uni. The protocol was divided into like this on-chain element and then this off-chain element, like with Uniswap Labs, and Labs was getting front-end fees and like, swap fees and stuff like that. And the Uni token holders were getting pretty much nothing except like inflation and like, tokens giving it out as incentives and all this kind of stuff. So there was like a real disconnect there between the labs and the DAO. It seems like, you guys have had one unified approach to this, kind of like what Hayden Adams suggested this week, right? Like, so he's like going through the unification of Uniswap. Why did you guys settle on this system to begin with? What do you think the advantages of it are?
Yeah, so that actually reminds me of what I was going to say. It's tied to what you just said, which was that it's exactly the type of use case we saw with Uniswap and sort of the front end being separate from the back end and who's collecting the fees, who's earning. And there's no real direct linkage between the profitability of the company tied back to the token or the project, right? And so in MetaDAO's case, we actually have to hand over all IP and all assets that are under this company to that entity that MetaDAO is creating. So it's a legal obligation in the sense that all revenue is flowing back to the treasury and the DAO entity. And the advantages are pretty clear. I think anyone who understands this, like trust goes two ways, but it has to be backed. And this is the way to back that trust that like we're taking in funds, but these funds, will eventually, if there's success that comes out of this project, you will benefit, right? And that's, it's what happens in the real world, right? Like when ventures back projects, they get, they do it through equity. But this is, I think, without getting into the legal aspect, but this is about as close as we can get in that regard, right? And yeah, so this is, I think the advantages are clear that it from our side, it shows that, hey, we're serious. We're not here to take your money and do a slow rug or we can't even do a fast rug if we wanted to do, but that there's real alignment and that alignment is backed via on-chain parameters and levers.
That's amazing. Okay, and let's talk about then the actual change, like why you guys came up with this system of doing things, right? So I think one of the reasons why Uniswap went that route was because of the regulatory regime in the US. Now, I know two of your team members are based in the US. I'm not sure where is based, but that's fine. And how has the current regime and stuff like the Genius Act, etc., kind of given you guys the confidence to do this kind of token launch in the US?
This would probably be best suited for MetaDAO. You should have Profit on the call. I don't want to comment. I don't want to get into the details of the legal side in terms of how they've structured things, because I want to be careful what I say. But they are working with a number of councils to ensure that what they're doing is compliant. I don't know the nitty-gritty details in terms of, or I don't have the confidence to say to make sure that I don't say anything that's wrong in that regard. But yeah, this would be best suited to look into their docs and ask them.
That's totally fine. But just from my understanding is the regulatory environment has shifted a lot, so much so that teams have confidence now to be building in the US, not worrying about the SEC.
Oh yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Things have dramatically shifted from a few years ago. The administration, it is very different than the administration that we had in the past, and now it's a lot of sense they're encouraging growth, and I think they see real value in having stable coins. Essentially, a lot of the stable coins are backed by treasury bills, right? And there's a real reason they'd want this to be as as accessible as possible. So yeah, from that regard, I think building a stablecoin product is much easier now than it would have been 2 years ago, and part of the reason it's a great time to launch is
yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so I guess not much is changing for you guys, right? Like your project's already been online for nearly a year. It's just now you're going to have a token, you're going to build a community around it. What do you see happening in the next today we're recording this on Monday, so by the time this episode goes out, the ICO is still ongoing. It's going to finish potentially in a few hours, like on Tuesday the 18th of November, just afternoon. And what happens after that? Like, what's next for Solomon the token and Solomon Labs as a protocol?
Yeah, so the ICO is ongoing. I think we're at, I think probably close to 4 million at this point. I haven't checked in the last few hours, but it will close on Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So I think that's 18:30 UTC. So that's the close date on February 18th, or sorry, not February, November 18th. That's the date. After this, we're going to, we didn't really get to talk about a lot of the value props of what we're building in terms of how we actually differentiate in the rails, right? The rails that we're talking about. But we're going to take probably a few days to a week or so, or to do a lot of housekeeping and to do a UI UX refresh. Some proposals need to be passed after the close raise in order to set things up correctly from our side so that we can put our treasury to work. But during this period, we're going to lock in some of our core customers that are going to be the first ones to use our product. There's something called Yield as a Service, and it's a permission service. So think of it as a B2B service specifically for allowing USDV yield to be streamed directly to USDV holders without the need for staking. So we're going to start onboarding those customers. The beta still will continue on. We'll onboard more users through the beta. And then once everything is neatly tied up together, then we're going to launch the product to the public. And we'll have, our launch partners announce along with all the integrations across the Solana DeFi ecosystem. And then there's going to be a lot more after that related to how we incentivize TVL growth. Those details will be released in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because a stablecoin lives and dies by its integrations into DeFi and its like ease of use and being used in DeFi products, having liquidity. So I was going to ask about some of the strategies that you guys had in mind of getting USDV and SUSDV in as many protocols as possible. I guess some of those conversations have already started.
Those conversations are we've already secured, across the DeFi ecosystem within every vertical there. We have a partner secured, basically, integrated or ready to be integrated. So for example, we already have our Pyth feeds live. What's necessary is sort of the bottleneck that towards integrations for things like, borrowing and lending, right? They need a price feed. So we have partners that are lending apps. We have partners for credit swaps, interest rate swaps. We have partners for other communities that are going to onboard with Yes. Yeah, that will be, you're right. That's an important part of having a stablecoin product, the ingredient towards having a stablecoin product be successful. And those are going to be there day one.
Nice. That's really cool. I'm really excited to see these announcements coming out. The token, like you said, so far the ICO raise, you've gotten about $4 million. In the metadao, documentation, you kind of have some loose targets of what you want to raise at. $2 million was the minimum. Congratulations on hitting that.
Yeah.
What ideas do you have for how much you guys want to raise, and how do you think that's going to impact feasibility of the project going forward?
Yes, the 2 million gets us runway for 1.5 to 2 years from a lean bootstrapped startup. The ideal target 5 to 8 is what really allows us to properly scale. In that, a lot of that has, launching a stablecoin product is pretty capital intensive in the sense that, not from an operational perspective, but you need to have a certain amount of capital just to sit at the table for a lot of these conversations to even occur. So these are agreements with venues, custody providers, sexes, negotiating better rates, negotiating things like, exemptions from ADLs. And so ultimately the ideal target that we're setting is about getting us a better product, lower fees, better yield, more robustness in terms of our infra. And so our operating expense doesn't change with the higher ideal target, but it simply allows us to scale much, much more quickly.
Yeah, interesting. I guess that, $5 to $8 million number, that would then count as the base for which your multiples would kick in for your tranches to release. Yeah. So for example, if you go with the $5 million number, then your first tranche releases at $10 million market cap for 3 months. And then obviously multiples of that all the way up to 32, which is $160 million market cap. If you can sustain that, then you
Yeah,
would
that
get
would
like
be
all.
so it would 5 million is close to around 10 million FDV. So because
Yeah.
you
Okay.
have to count the full token, so it would be
Yeah, I see. I
multiples
see.
of the FDV. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
same thing, but
Yeah, 320 million.
yep,
So you
yep,
have a lot of
yep.
incentives then to really, develop and grow the project and get up to, those kind of numbers. How much TVL do you think you would need to get the protocol, like, at this seat at the table? Like, what are the comparable projects on Solana right now? Like, who are your competitors, and how do you see Solomon differentiating itself to kind of gain the market share?
Yeah, well, just one note on the 5 to 8 figure. So there's a few things there, right? There's that we are aligned such that we try to take as little as possible
Yeah.
necessary in order to develop this, because we have to hit those multiples, right? If we
Mhm.
set a very high FTV to begin with, that makes it much more difficult for us to hit those targets. But it sort of optimizes, the two sides of like taking money in and then also thinking about what is the least amount we need in order to succeed. And then the other thing is we want to only take the higher amount if there's significant oversubscription and unmet demand. If we just raise, let's say 8 million is committed, we're not going to take 8 million. We want orders of magnitude more committed in order to even come close to that 5 to 8.
Yeah.
So that's just one note. Yeah, in terms of differentiators, I'm glad sort of going back to what actually is Solomon and why we differ from what exists today. So I was mentioning, I started this conversation talking about Athena and the 2-token model, and there's a real tension between the spendable token and the stake token, and in terms of their functions, right? And for Athena's case, you could imagine them just as successful with just having a staked version, right? And the spendable token is really not serving much purpose in terms of real value add. And the same is true for most yield-bearing stablecoins that are true across Solana, Ethereum, or any on-chain. They've all adopted this 2-token model, but one leg of that, one side of that is basically useless. It's not actually being used for anything productive and is sitting idle. So what we've done is said, how do we make that side actually usable? And still, how do we make it useful and valuable while maintaining its properties as a composable dollar? So our stablecoin USDV, what we've done is develop something called YAS, which is yield as a service. And how that works is that, let's imagine that you have, so at a high level, we directly stream the yield to the USDV that's being held in your wallet. And that just ticks up versus rebasing or drifting in value. And the sort of value prop there is that, especially for LPs, for example, right? Let's imagine that you're an LP that's deployed liquidity on a DEX, and right now you have USDT and, let's say, Meteora as your token, like, USDT and Meteora. You have $1 million worth of USDT and $1 million worth of Meteora. Right now, you're just earning on the swap fees that exist. Imagine if that LP were to change the stable leg into USDV. They would come to our website. Our website would automatically detect their LP position after they connect the wallet, and you'd be able to select that and then state whether you want to designate a wallet where your yield would be streamed or just default to the owned wallet. Once they check off some agreements, after that point, $1 million worth of USDV is now earning yield from our basis engine. So now you
Nice.
have base fees stacking on top of the yield generated, so 10 to 15%. And this is a game changer, right? Now, like, the flywheel effect will be such that once you have the first LP do this, right, then they can fine tune their LP fees and slightly lower it. And now everything is routed through their LP position and they're earning a lot more. And that forces a change for everyone else to then pile on, right? So
Nice.
it's a way to earn more. And that's one use case for a USDV, which can earn yield while still being a dollar, right? While still being composable. So LP is an example, but more than that, there's treasuries, right? Treasuries that don't want any lockups, cooldowns. They want to preserve their capital in a stable coin that's not locked away or staked because they're making payments or they're doing all sorts of other things. And now they can do the exact same process and sign up and start to accrue yield directly to their treasury wallet.
Nice.
And this is touchless in the sense that there's no routing change. There's no changes to or interactions with programs directly. It's touchless. It's happening off chain in the sense that we're calculating the yields and distributing it. And then the records are on chain and auditable. And then the final sort of, I would say the big use case is neobanks. Neobanks are going to be a core piece of infra that exists for us in crypto. And one of the problems that they have is that the stables that they hold, the users that hold stables in these neobanks, the way they access, if they're trying to get permissionless yield from, let's say, Athena, right, and they have a staked version of it in their neobank, they can't unstake for 7 days, cooldown of 7 days. And then, it needs to settle within 24 hours typically, right? Like these payments that are being made. So then their options is using RFQ, like they get a quote. The quote they're going to get is for a staked version of that Athena stable to some DEX that has very little liquidity or there's a lot of slippage. It's just not a very practical way to hold stables in a neobank while earning. So a neobank can partner with us and use YAS and start to stream stables to their users or start to stream the yield to the users, 10 to 15%. And we're already in conversations with a few new banks to do this. And you might have some hints in terms of the metadao cohort of apps that exist. There's sort of an easy path for us to integrate and the door's already, open in that sense. So that's sort of the real value unlock in terms of how we differ and what we're offering. And no one's done this before. So we're really the first ones that are making all of this idle capital sitting in LPs, treasuries, neobanks productive. And there's over 150 billion of it across chains.
Yeah, that's really exciting stuff. Like it seems like, your novel techniques here would differentiate you so much that hopefully it should lead to a nice adoption flywheel.
Yeah.
We talked earlier, and I guess this is a slightly like a different side of the same argument, is we talked earlier about like the Solana rails, right, and how they're advantageous for payments. One of the negatives for Solana is it doesn't have the mature DeFi ecosystem that something like Ethereum has. The TVLs and the amount of liquidity available on Ethereum is literally orders of magnitude deeper than on Solana. Does that worry you that, the Solana DeFi ecosystem, it seems like it's not something the Solana community, like the holders, value that much? Is that something you've noticed? Is that something you worry about? Or do you think it's still growing and it should be okay?
I think it's growing. I think we're starting to see some inflows for stables, but we ourselves could be the differentiator as well, right? Like we could have an impact on the flows there, right? Like you need a reason to come on chain and have stables there. So ideally, we are one of the reasons more stables come on chain. But I do think, again, as someone who's building on Solana, I do think there's something to it becoming the NASDAQ of the on-chain NASDAQ, right? I think there's a lot of real assets that are coming on-chain. A lot of that is going to occur on Solana. For us, we're launched on Solana, we're based in Solana, and a lot of the value accrual occurs on the Solana chain, but our long-term plans are to be multi-chain. This idea is applicable across chains, and we plan to be on these chains as well.
I'm really excited to see you guys on Ethereum one day soon, of course. But that's really cool. I just wanted to make it like, is there anything? Actually, I do have one more line of questioning that I wanted to discuss with you. Is there's a lot of fear in the crypto markets right now. People are scared that the cycle top is already in, and we're going to enter 2026 like prolonged bear period. Potentially, I'm of the opinion that this will be an extended cycle, but that opinion, I think, is becoming more of a minority opinion with the market sentiment right now. Like, how does that impact what you guys are doing? Like, are you worried? Are you scared, or do you just not pay attention to that stuff and you just heads down building?
I mean, we launched an ICO in probably one of the most, the index on the fear index was at a 10.
10,
yeah, and we've done quite well. I mean, it speaks to, I think, a lot of what people see in terms of us being something real and bullish on us. But so even just this as an example, like it hasn't really impacted us, right? I'm sure the macros have held back some of the flows, but I'm not worried about what the market does. We get cycles, we get ups and downs. It's hard to, if you start to think about building with that in mind, in the sense that like you're making all your decisions based on the market movement, you're not going to survive. I've built in the bear and I've built in the bull, and each one has its advantages. There's real advantages to both, and cons. But I'm excited to build regardless. It's what's interesting is like, I'll comment on this, is launching an ICO in 2025. There's this strange thing that happens, which is polymarket. And so every ICO gets this shadow market that is a secondary market that's betting on the outcome of your ICO. And so right now on polymarket, I think we're already at over 2.5 million in volume, while we've raised, 4 million or something. And that's probably and this is before the final day. Like, the final day is when you get sort of the real commits come through. And I'm assuming that polymarket's gonna fly up in volume by, a few million by the end. So this would make us the highest volume trade on polymarket for any sort of ICO bet, right? But that also monetizes your FUDing. So we've had deliberate, very concerted efforts to create FUD, and which is really like, you've like fake screenshots and videos claiming all sorts of things, and then you can tie them back to bettors on polymarket. So it is strange. It's very like, I know we're heading into the, some people are saying we're heading to the bear, but in terms of people's demand for betting and speculating, it's an all-time high. And I guess I just wanted to comment on the polymarket aspect. It does, I don't know, I don't have it fully formulated how this is going to change things as ICOs become popular again. But yeah, it's definitely a part of it now.
That's interesting. Yeah, and talking about this discussion that's happening around your token launch, I saw that there was a little bit of a to and fro that you got into with your brother on Twitter there. Like, what's the story there? What's going on? Like, is there a little bit of little beef in the family? Tell me about that.
The holiday dinners are interesting. So like I said, I think we're all pretty competitive. My brother's been winning for some time. He's now the head of engineering at ChatGPT, OpenAI. So he's commenting how I'm trying a little too hard to prove myself, maybe some insecurities as the younger brother, but I told him I've got the height on him. And then once he finishes up, so no, there's it's playful. We take jabs at each other, and we were laughing about it, and on after the comments on Twitter. But yeah, no, it's definitely interesting at the dinner table when we all get together.
Is there anything, Ranga, that we haven't talked about that you'd like to cover before we wrap up?
No, I think this is the longest conversation I've had about the subject. So I'm just really happy to sit down and do this. It's full circle, like in a lot of ways. So yeah, the ICO is open right now. We'll probably see the highest flows of commits happen within the last, in the last few hours, typically. And everything it's pro rata in terms of the token allocation, and you'll be refunded for the commits that you make that don't end up getting used. I said, follow us on Twitter, join us on our journey. We're here to bring back ownership of the dollar rails to the community. We want to democratize that, and I think there's something really powerful about that. This is the biggest pillar in crypto, and it's a shame that we missed out on ownership of it. So yeah, I'm excited to bring that back.
Yeah, and just before we wrap up, a disclaimer that I've not been paid for this call, this meeting, and I don't have any tokens or anything. Like, I do plan on buying some in the ICO, but I'm not getting any kind of preferential treatment or anything like that. So yeah, this is just
that note, it's equal and fair terms for everyone. Everything is transparent. There's been no paid advertisements, KOLs, shill campaigns, etc., despite some of the FUD that's out there.
That's great. Okay, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you, even though you're the Solana builder now, but I can forgive that for now. But I wish you the best of luck
for both. Yeah,
maybe not, but that's okay. This is actually going to be my first ever transactions on Solana, is taking part in your ICO.
Are you serious? Okay, all right.
Yeah,
glad
so
we're the
I've
first.
never actually. Yeah, well, let's. I'm excited. I'm really excited to support you guys, and obviously, that's why I've had you on here. And I think you guys are building some cool stuff. Just get it over to Ethereum soon, on the multi-chain vision of yours. But thank you so much, Ranga. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It's a really cool story that you have, and I'm really excited that people can actually take ownership of Solomon Labs, Solomon the protocol, and I think that's really awesome. So best of luck. I'm really excited to see how you guys get on, and I hope you massive success.
Thanks, Wak. It's been a pleasure.